I'm Sophie and I love books.
I'm Rudi and I love movies, and this is It Was a Book First, the podcast about new book-to-screen adaptations. Today we're going on one more journey with Odysseus, this time through an academic lens. Professor Kyle Gervais and Assistant Professor Il-Kweon from Western University in London, Ontario, Canada, are here to share their thoughts on Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey and to school us on Homer's epic poem. And yes, there will be spoilers for the film and poem throughout.
If you're new here, Rudi and I are culture reporters with bylines at places like Esquire and the Washington Post. And on this podcast, we discuss the page-to-screen adaptations that everyone is talking about.
Before we get to our Odyssey deep dive, quick programming note. Next week, we're covering Apple TV's take on Cape Fear, an adaptation of John D. MacDonald's novel The Executioners. That's also a remake of two earlier Cape Fear films with a very special guest. So stay tuned for that. And we're really excited to have Kyle and Il-Kweon here to discuss The Odyssey. Thanks to you both for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So you both teach the classics and Greek literature. Can you tell us about your areas of expertise as it pertains to The Odyssey? Kyle, you want to start first?
Sure. So Il-Kweon and I are both classicists here at Western. My primary focus is actually usually on a bit of later literature. So I work on Roman epic primarily, which is in the same tradition as Greek epic, which goes all the way back to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. But I'm often viewing poems like the Odyssey through the lens of later receptions of what they have to say. My work also goes chronologically beyond the Roman period into the Middle Ages with Latin literature, through the Renaissance. I've also got an interest in how classics is treated in modern pop culture. I've
Perfect for this.
Yeah,
Great. Perfect for this. Yeah. I've got an article on the movie 300 I wrote a few years back. I've got a weirder one comparing violence in Roman epic poetry with the films of Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, nice.
Cool.
And I've also done some translation work. I've got a book coming out translating some of the poems of the Roman poet Ovid. So I feel like I can sympathize with people like Emily Wilson in the challenges of how to turn these things from one very different language into another.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
Il-Kweon, how about you?
I am a specialist in Greek literature, particularly archaic Greek poetry.
Okay.
So that includes things like the early Greek epic tradition, including Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. But my kind of special niche is in Greek lyric poetry, which is kind of floating around from about the 7th century BCE, which is only a little bit later than where we usually think of Homer and his poems. And there's a lot of interactions between these two areas. So I'm very excited to be talking about that today.
Awesome. So I feel like we should just jump right in. And I want to hear, what did you both think of Nolan's The Odyssey?
Well, I had a great time. So, yeah.
Same
Carl and
here.
I, went to see the film together as
that's
part of
great.
a kind of a departmental outing.
Oh, nice.
And we were all very impressed with the film as a whole. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn when I'm saying that we thought it was a really clever adaptation, but that it was Nolan's Odyssey.
I think that's a good way of putting
not
it.
necessarily 100% true to the epic poem.
And I don't think it should be. I think someone trying to do an adaptation that is just the epic poem, you might as well just go read it, because it is a poem that is meant to be reinterpreted. Christopher Nolan was never going to make anything other than Christopher Nolan's film. I've been a huge Nolan fan kind of forever. Tenet was not my favorite.
We agree with you on
We agree
that.
with you.
Yeah. And I appreciated Oppenheimer more than I liked it. And I think my initial experience of the Odyssey was a little bit like that too. Like all the way through, I was like, this is very interesting. I'm really thinking a lot about what he's doing. I'm not having the most fun in the world. But, as the days have gone by, I'm feeling like I'm kind of loving it more every day.
Yeah.
So it is it is it it's a big budget art film, and art films are not always just like popcorn movie, right? So
Yeah.
it stuck with me, and in kind of the best possible way. So yeah.
Kyle, I would agree with you very much on the feeling like the movie gets stronger the more you think about it and really sit with it. It feels to me like I'm just kind of been bowled over by how strong the message of the movie is, being welcoming to others, this not engaging in xenophobia, letting people in, not being Antinious, excuse me,
And
and
Tenuous.
being
Antinous.
Antinous. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And I'm curious, is Homer's Odyssey supposed to leave us with a strong message at the end? And if so, what is like that original message supposed to be?
Il-Kweon, I'm gonna let you field that if you'd like.
So I think it's really difficult to talk about a message, but I think certainly that the poem makes us think a lot about what it means to live in a society and why the norms of society exist from the perspective of the Greeks. So, and the answer that is often kind of offered up to us is one of living together in a community, not just in terms of kind of accepting others into the community, but also in terms of showing proper respect to each other and kind of having parallels between life as a citizen and life in the family. So there's a lot of emphasis on kind of familial harmony, that getting paralleled onto civic life when Odysseus comes home and becomes reunited with his family and set things right in the kind of familial sphere. It is expected that harmony kind of extends out into the kind of civic sphere. And these kinds of questions are rehearsed throughout the poem in the encounters with various places that Odysseus visits. So most notably with the Cyclops, instead of participating in the usual kind of welcoming a stranger to the hearth and giving them food, the Cyclops eats them. And the kind of ultimate signal is the kind of perversion of the idea of hospitality, where in kind of normal Greek custom, you're supposed to exchange gifts and you're supposed to give a gift to a stranger who comes to visit your home. And the Cyclops instead gives a gift in the form of saying that he will eat Odysseus last. So
Very
it's this kind of
generous.
perversion of what normal Greek society was viewing as the right way of being. So this kind of testing of norms is, I think, what the poem does a lot.
I would say one of the things that surprised me most and that is making me love the movie more and more every day is I never would have guessed that that would have been the controlling sort of metaphor for the whole, or the controlling theme for the whole poem. Like there are much more obvious ways to do a modern movie version of the Odyssey. Like it's just a family film. Like it's about a guy trying to get home to his wife and kids, or it's an adventure story, or it's a war story, or it's this fun little fantasy, or it's horror, and there are all of those elements. To pick up specifically, and how Nolan talks about, Zeus's law, right? And to pick up specifically on, as Il-Kweon said, kind of one of the most fundamental things in these ancient cultures is how you treat the reciprocal relationship between guest and host when you're traveling to a different place, and to make that kind of what the movie was about, and then use that as this, as you said, Sophie, this powerful sort of modern metaphor was really striking. I think it does, as a modern metaphor, it goes beyond. It certainly is things like how to treat immigrants, and that has obvious relevance in many countries, including yours.
Very much so.
But it extends to any sort of relationship between people that aren't your family or aren't your city or aren't your country. It's how you behave in wartime. It's how you negotiate trade relationships. It is a reciprocal relationship too. So it is not only if there is someone coming into your space, how do you treat them, but also that person who comes into your space is supposed to be a good guest.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if I'm playing the other side of the fence here, I think there could be a reading which I wouldn't agree with, of that immigrants coming into a country have a certain obligation to behave in a certain way.
Mm.
And I don't think that was Nolan's message,
No.
but it is when all of those sort of norms break down, either in Homer's world or in our world,
Hmm.
then you start getting into trouble. And to make the movie about that was pretty cool.
Well, and part of making the film about that is also changing a bit who Odysseus is, right? And that's a major change from the poem, is that Odysseus is less of a trickster. He's less, he still has a lot of hubris, but maybe it's downplayed a little bit. And he's more of an Oppenheimer like figure who is suffering from PTSD from the choices that he made, and what that has wrought on civilization. So what did you both think about kind of shifting Odysseus into this different version than what, people who read the poem are used to?
Well, Rudi, you were the one that read the Emily Wilson
Yes.
translation. I do wonder, like, did you like Odysseus? Is he
So
likable?
I don't think so.
No.
That's one of the big takeaways I had, is that you're the whole time you're kind of like, he's kind of like an arrogant prick at times.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
Yeah.
put it lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he is made more likable in the Nolan version because you sympathize with him more.
Yeah.
You don't really
Yeah.
sympathize with him that much
I don't.
in the
Yeah.
poem.
I don't think we do as modern viewers or modern readers. As a Homeric hero, he is perfectly in keeping with what Homeric
Mm,
heroes were like.
mhm.
They were what we read as selfish and arrogant, and to be a hero in the ancient world does not necessarily mean to be good. It just means to be like, heroes are not good people in the ancient world. They're just big people. They do things more
Sure.
dramatically than
Interesting.
regular people do. Their highs are higher, their lows are
Right.
lower.
Well, it's like the
They're
way, Kyle, that like at least in the Wilson translation, Odysseus is constantly referred to as the god-like Odysseus.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. They are just much closer to gods than humans are, and the portrayal of gods in Homer's poems are also these really amplified versions
Right.
of humans too. So I don't think Odysseus is meant to be unlikable for a Homeric audience, but he certainly is not someone we recognize as heroic today. So
Hmm.
if you want to make some sort of protagonist of the audience that's just not going to turn away from, you got to do something different with them.
Mm.
And I don't want to keep talking forever on this one particular theme, but I would, at some point, I'd love to talk about the particular complication of this book to screen adaptation is that this poem has been around for thousands of years, and there have been multiple Odysseus's all the
Hmm.
way through this
True.
time. And so I think Nolan he's not just directly responding to Homer or to any particular adaptation, like any particular translation of Homer. He's inheriting this whole tradition of ways of Odysseus being portrayed. But that's going to open up
I
a
do.
whole can of worms. So
That's
Oh
an
no, I
I can
interesting
think
leave
it's
point,
that.
though.
a I
Yeah,
think
go
it's a
ahead,
very
Sophie.
interesting point, especially when something, is in conversation with past adaptations. But I also think when you cast an actor like Matt Damon, who comes with, I don't mean baggage in a bad way,
Yeah.
but they come with their own character assignment. He is a very like everyman, likable actor. That's his whole thing. And most of us have been watching him in things for what, two, three decades at
Yeah,
this
at
Yeah.
least.
point.
Yeah.
So I feel like the we spoke on our first episode about the Odyssey about how we found this to be a very human adaptation. The gods are taken out. As we said, he's less of this big hero and more of someone grappling with emotions. And to me, that feels really originated as well in the Matt Damon casting decision versus
Yeah.
if they had cast someone else.
Yeah. And I think me and a number of friends and colleagues have talked about just how not charming this Odysseus is. And it is so against type for Matt Damon, and not clever, and not talking all the time, and seems like some, well, as you said, PTSD or combat trauma, like a veteran essentially.
Yeah.
And I think picking someone who, like, maybe the most recent thing I saw him in was rewatching The Martian,
Sure.
where
Yeah.
he's just so fun,
Same.
right, and so
So
clever.
good.
Like that's Odysseus in some ways, right? I can figure my way out of any jam. And then to have something like that in the back of your mind with this
Yeah.
portrayal that's so closed off was really. And then if you know the poem, and wily Odysseus, clever Odysseus, complicated Odysseus, lying Odysseus, always talking Odysseus, like I'm doing right now, it's just so strikingly different. So
No, but that's such a
yeah,
good point, because I hadn't even really like maybe put two and two together, this idea that on paper Damon does make a lot of sense with the characterization of Odysseus from the poem, and Nolan and Damon both totally subvert that
yep,
in this, which I think is like really smart. And when there are these little moments like we talked about on our last episode, where there is like a very little minor touch of human, it's kind of humor rather, it's kind of just because Damon can't help but be a little funny, and it does
Yeah.
lighten what is otherwise a pretty heavy
yeah,
story. And that's something that he brings to this story that I think is really great and maybe unexpected, like we're talking
yeah.
about.
Damon can't help being Damon. I agree. Il-Kweon, you and I, when we were chatting, I also was spinning my fan theory that that's maybe supposed to be like a flash of the Odysseus who was Odysseus before the Trojan War.
Ah,
But that's just me.
that's a great
Yeah,
theory. No, I love
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
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 Il-Kweon, I don't know what your reactions were.
So I was thinking that Nolan was really quite running with kind of Emily Wilson's translation of kind of Odysseus being the complicated man, really kind of taking that in a very interior way, as opposed to the more kind of exterior way that the poem more often deals with through kind of acts of cleverness. But instead, it's being explored on a kind of psychological level. So, and I really like that, artistic decisions have to be made, and Nolan made a decision and commits fully. So I find that reflected, for example, in the way that the narrative is told. So kind of mirroring the flashbacks or kind of the kind of narration of the episodes where he meets these various magical and folkloric figures to the variations in the poem. But are we even sure he's telling these tales to Calypso, or is he just kind of remembering to himself on the inside, and then Charlize Theron is just reacting to it?
Yeah.
But it's this kind of interiority, and that really is
That's a great
very it's a new thing that Nolan has brought for me. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and is a nice way to maybe segue into some of the other changes that are made in the framework. I mean, you just mentioned like we eliminate an entire population of people basically that he spends a lot of time with telling these stories, and instead, you're right, I hadn't thought of it as he is living all of that in his mind. He's maybe not even telling what happened. What did you think of making that change to change the framing device essentially of this, of most of the second half of the story becomes this just different way of telling the story?
So I personally thought it was a very clever choice,
Yeah.
and it made me feel reassured that he had thought really carefully about not just the kind of things that happened, but also how things were told and how things were framed. I'm a bit of a sucker for structure, so I I love that he took care with that. I think it's definitely kind of him showing himself as a storyteller of his own. Yeah, himself.
Do
Yeah,
you?
I think too, I was just going to say, looking at Nolan's work, I think Oppenheimer is just a really good example of this too. You're talking about two like very long stories with quite a lot to cover. And he's asking us, people starved of attention span abilities, maybe not you guys, but I will put myself in there. And, I think it's really, really smart to break these things up and make it more engaging so it feels like a puzzle that you're unraveling instead of just a linear, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It really, really gives it that propulsive nature.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Christopher Nolan, ever since Memento, was ever going to just
Yeah.
tell a straight line
straightforward story.
Odyssey.
Very
I don't
true.
think he is literally capable of doing that.
Mhm.
It reflects really nicely not only kind of the structure of the Odyssey, which is flashbacks and storytelling, but various ancient authors understood just as much as someone like Nolan that if you tell a story in a straight line, it can get boring. And there are a number. I'm thinking on the Roman side, the most famous would be Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is this long poem about all these different Greek myths. And so many of them are like, someone sits down and, well, let me tell you a story about this myth.
Mhm.
And then within that story, someone says, okay, I'm going to tell you a story about this myth. And you get like nested stories, and you get these really interesting, complicated narrative sort of structures. So that's certainly not a unique to Nolan. And I think his choice to do that honors what the Odyssey does, and it honors pretty common like ancient storytelling technique. They probably more so than us moderns loved a good story. And if a story could have a story inside a story and then a story inside that, all the more interesting. So
No, it's true though. I mean, look, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I've been obsessed with Greek myths since I was a kid. And then I read all the Greek tragedies in college. And now I'll read like any historical fiction interpretation of a Greek myth. And it's just like endless wells of story and drama and human intrigue. And it's just so good. And it's so adaptable. I
Yeah.
love when people rediscover these things because it's truly just an endless well of material.
yeah.
The fact that the kind of retelling of the story was kind of preserved, I thought it was really lovely that it kind of preserved the kind of thematic baggage that it brought along with it, particularly around kind of the reliability of Odysseus's tales,
Yes.
because all the more magical elements are kind of from that part of the poem.
Yeah, do you think that is like, are we supposed to think that Odysseus is an unreliable narrator and that over the years he has taken these journeys, these trials, these little expeditions and made them out to be more fantastical than they actually are?
I mean, scholars have certainly suggested that
What?
that some
was
of the
the
stories
Cyclops just
might
a big
be
Yeah.
Okay,
I
know
maybe
we're
not
already dealing
quite
with
to that
fiction,
extent,
but
but at the end of the day, in the poem, he's supposed to be kind of entertaining his hosts by telling these stories. So there's room for thinking of them as being embellished. But not only that, quite often Odysseus kind of pretends to be somebody else. He doesn't come out and say he is Odysseus. And in fact, throughout he gets even more likely to say he's not Odysseus, but that he's a Cretan. And Cretans in Greek culture are idiomatically liars. So there's so there's almost an expectation that he would be lying a little bit, and kind of the overlap between the idea of lying and deception being such an important theme in the poem. I think there is an expectation, or the poem at least asks you to ask that question, whether it's all accurate.
can't trust anyone.
Well,
No, no,
I think there's an interesting shift from how Homer treats that to how Nolan treats it. I mean, in
absolutely.
Homer, Odysseus is lying for very strategic reasons. When he
Hmm.
gets back home,
Yes,
he's mostly lying to maintain his disguise. Sometimes he just
yes.
lies for the fun of it. But like this, I'm trying to Emily Wilson. One of the speeches is introduced as like, and then Odysseus, Lord of Lies, says, "I will tell you the whole truth."
Yes.
And proceeds to completely lie, right? But
Yep.
sometimes it's self-preservation. When he's with the Phaeacians, which is that
Mm,
whole scene that gets cut out, as Il-Kweon said, he's expected to tell a good. It's like a tall tale, a traveler
Yeah.
Mhm.
story, and the host, that's what they're expecting, entertain us, and then the reward is we will give you more gifts. And so this actually goes back to this idea of guest friendship, that we are. It's a reciprocal arrangement.
I love
Right.
this.
We haven't had a good story for a while. Tell us a good one, and then we'll
Well,
give you more gifts.
it's
And
like
that
when
is,
you bring your kooky friend to dinner and
Yeah.
you're like, yeah,
yeah,
we'll like pick up your meal, but like
yeah,
tell us about the weird thing you did last
yeah.
weekend.
And literally, he gets to the end of his story, and then they're like, okay, let's get some more gifts for this guy because that was great, right?
yeah.
But I mean, that's not going to work in Nolan's film.
Right.
So it gets interiorized, as Oquan said, and it becomes the unreliability is more of a psychological trauma or
Yes.
misremembering or guilt, getting in the way of the truth and all that. So it's this whole it's fitting with this whole shift from a exterior sort of Homeric portrayal to a
Hmm.
much more tortured internal portrayal. I I want to make sure we don't get to the end of this without saying,
Please.
in Homer, Odysseus is not broken up about the Trojan War at all.
Right.
Like, he is not guilty at all about the, he's like, we did a great job, we sacked the city, we got a bunch of loot and slaves and all this sort of stuff. So that is entirely a more recent sort of development of the character.
And is
But
that
again,
part of Emily Wilson's translation? Or
uh,
when you say recent development,
Yeah,
like
is that's
recent as in
right.
just Nolan
Or is that
or
something that's happened over the years?
uh, I might be missing something, but and Ilkwan, correct me, but I think the shift to the sort of PTSD combat trauma portrayal is this movie and probably The Return from a couple
Okay,
years
right.
ago.
The Ray Fiennes and
Yeah.
Julia
Yeah,
Pinesh. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
it is building on a tradition that starts with the Romans, and then through the Middle Ages, of not making Odysseus feel guilt, but portraying Odysseus as the bad guy.
Hmm.
When the Romans started talking about Odysseus, the Romans, they actually traced their descent back to the Trojans. So for them, Odysseus as a Greek is an enemy. He's on the wrong side of the Trojan War. And so when the Romans start talking about Odysseus in myth, especially Virgil's Aeneid, which I think
I was
you
about to
guys
say,
mentioned,
yeah, this is the story of the Aeneid, right? Like
yeah,
the reframing of what
yeah,
happened.
yeah, and the whole fall of Troy that we see in the movie, the most detailed account of that comes from Virgil's Aeneid, and that is
Oh,
told from the
wow.
perspective of a Trojan who is seeing
Huh.
Odysseus and all of the other Greeks as the bad guys, and Odysseus, having come up with the Trojan horse thing, he is like the uber bad guy. But this sets off this portrayal of Odysseus as a villain. The culmination of that is in the Middle Ages in Dante's Inferno, where Odysseus is actually down
Cool.
in the underworld, hanging out with all of the other
Yeah.
fraudulent counselors, the people who gave bad advice, and the bad advice is the Trojan horse, basically. Um,
That's so
but
interesting.
I think
Lore.
I think it's a pretty modern thing to then take that villainous side and say, okay, what it actually is now Odysseus himself is
Yeah.
Right.
feeling regret for his villainous
And almost
behavior.
make it a virtue in some
And
ways
Yeah,
you know,
for how we view that character.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
here's my question is look, I'm just a moviegoer here. I loved it. I think that's a super cool interpretation. What on earth do you guys think about that? Because it's obviously not proved in the text. Like, what do you think of that decision to interpret the story that way?
Oh well, I personally think that it's part of a kind of modern take on the Greek epic tradition, and it has been happening particularly in the kind of reclaiming of lost voices or deprioritized voices. So particularly with the women and with the Trojan women especially. Um, so there's been a lot of reimaginings, retellings from their perspectives. At the same time, there's also been some kind of scholarship done by particularly psychologists working with veterans and using the Homeric poems as part of therapy to help them kind of deal with PTSD, especially. So I think it is in a tradition of sorts, albeit a more modern one. But Kyle actually kind of just reminded me of kind of more complex or more complicated reactions to Odysseus already with 5th century Athenians, with Greek tragedy, where they are already kind of thinking about whether the Trojan War was entirely good and whether actually Odysseus was the best guy. So I'm thinking especially of Sophocles' Ajax, where Odysseus is actually kind of at odds with Athena, who, in his opinion, takes things too far by kind of turning one of his fellow Greeks and a great soldier, a great leader, mad. Athena says to Odysseus, you should rejoice. We have destroyed an enemy. And he says, oh, I'm not so sure about that. We should give him his due honors because he was a good guy and he did a great job and he was really loyal until you turned him mad. So there's kind of reworking of the character throughout the ages.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry, Kyle, we're going to say something.
I think to answer your basic question, I'm totally fine with Nolan doing that because, as we've just said, we've been doing that forever with Greek myth, what you're supposed to do, so I think especially for something like very ancient oral poem like the Odyssey, it just doesn't make sense to even really talk about like the original. But even if you want to do that, I just reminded myself pulling up Emily Wilson's translation. Right in the very beginning, when the poet is talking to the muse, he says, "Tell the old story for our modern times." So right at the very beginning, there is poetic license for the point of this story is we want to know what it means to us now, right? And that
really
applies.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can I ask you another question? It seemed I had never read or like understood the idea that like Helen of Troy or Helen of Sparta really, but is like, you did not do this for me. I am very angry about this. Is that in the text somewhere, or is that like a Nolan invention?
So I think that's a Nolan invention.
I think
but
so too.
Before I talk too much, one, am I right?
He's nodding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think so. I heard you talk about that on the podcast when I was listening the other day, and I went back to just double check I wasn't misremembering something. I think you are right. I think she is portrayed as the stereotypical kind of good queen and good wife. She is like taking care of the visitors. She's getting them snacks. She's weaving, which is what good women are supposed to do.
Well, and she's a daughter of Zeus too, right? Am I wrong about that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh God, who isn't? I mean,
he raped a lot of women. Yes. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he transformed into a swan and raped her mother, Leda. So
I knew it.
Actually, one of the most I'm getting off topic, but
that's okay.
The stripping of the divineness of all of it in Nolan was really interesting. You don't get the sense that any of these are demigods, but yeah, she is, and she is portrayed in royal splendor, as befitting a queen, as befitting a demigoddess. She doesn't say hardly anything in the poem. I think a sort of reading of her as like this unwilling captive is possible. And especially Wilson brings it out really nicely in her translation, but it's in any translation you look for. She does kind of tell this story of meeting Odysseus during the Trojan War because he snuck into the city and then he kills a bunch of Trojans, and all of the other Trojan women are mad about it, she says. But she's like, I'm happy because I was ready to go home, and I was so mad at the goddess Aphrodite for making me lose my mind and leave my wonderful son and my big, strong, beautiful, handsome husband. And yeah, right. So you can read that as someone saying what she needs to say to
Yeah.
deal with her captivity now. But Nolan definitely makes that much more, that undertone, if it's there, he makes it very prominent. Yeah.
We've alluded a little to this, but I want to ask about two things that Nolan kind of changes or introduces into the story, and that's the character of Sinon, who, you know, I believe is from Aeneid?
The Aeneid.
The Aeneid. Yeah. And then also showing the siege of Troy, with sacking of Troy. Sinon becomes kind of like the moral center of the story, and really I think the character that makes Odysseus realize what he's done wrong. And then we also get to see the sacking of Troy, which is something that I don't remember being told as detailed, at least in the poem. What did you think about introducing that character and that scene into this story? It kind of feels like you kind of have to have at least the Troy scene because it's a big action spectacle.
Was very surprised. I wouldn't have guessed in a million years that that would be the character that he sort of latched onto, and that we would get kind of Virgil's version of the siege of Troy. I think it works very effectively. I think Nolan has been very intelligent at taking a very large cast of characters and winnowing it down to just the core characters, and especially with the Greek army. I mean, we really just kind of get Sinon, who is like the innocent sort of victim that Odysseus feels guilty about, and then Agamemnon, who represents all of the like malevolence of the Greek army, and cutting out, like, I was kind of hoping Achilles would show up at some point because he does in the poem, but you know what? It was sort of intelligent to leave him out. So I think it was a very efficient narrative choice. I think it worked well. I think, again, it's turning what was, by the time of certainly the Romans, treating Odysseus as a villain, turning that on its head to make it into Odysseus as feeling guilty. So in Virgil's treatment, Sinon is part of the villainy. He kind of lies to the Trojans about this whole thing of like, oh, well, Odysseus was like super mean to me and everything. And he's actually in on the game, and he lies kind of in the model of Odysseus to trick the Trojans into bringing in the Trojan horse. So I think Nolan's taken the germ of that, retold it not as these are villains, but this is a man who is feeling guilty over exploiting in a necessary way his dear friend. So I thought it was clever. Yeah.
It's your interpretation that it's like the part we're seeing Troy as it was depicted in the Aeneid in that scene.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, the details of it are, and certainly Sinon. I mean, he is by far most prominent from the Aeneid, but characterized again in a different way. And I think throughout the movie, Nolan has just picked up on these big and like sometimes tiny details and just done different things with them, which is really cool.
This sort of speaks to the idea that you could almost say that this is the Nolan translation of the Odyssey, right? Like, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is translating it for our times, and taking all of this lore, as you might say, Sophie, and kind of putting it together into a new narrative, and I think that's really interesting.
Can we talk about translations, like book translations?
Please.
Yeah. I'd love to hear, like, if you two have like your favorites or anything else you want to mention about the different translations.
Is this like an astrology thing for classicists? Like, name your favorite Odyssey translation. It says something about you.
Il-Kweon, I don't know if we've ever talked about it. Can I put you on the spot? Do you have a?
So I confess that I don't have a favorite translation of the Odyssey.
They're all your favorites.
We're reporting you to the department.
Yeah. I've always liked the Penguin one.
Okay.
Who
did the
one
Penguin
I
one?
read at school? I can't remember because it's the one I read at school, and then
Is
when
that
I went to
Fagles or is
university.
it-
Yeah, I was gonna say. Is that Fagles, maybe?
Oh no, it was not the Vagels one.
Okay, okay.
Ryu, was it in prose?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. There's an old one in prose rather than poetry by
Okay.
a guy named E.V. Ryu or something like that.
And why do you like? Why is that one the one you're partial to? Because it's the one you kind of learned in school and maybe your first introduction to it.
Yes, I think so. Especially because it was so tied up with my first kind of interaction with classics.
Sure.
It just is kind of very special to me.
Yeah.
You always remember your first, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. But I have enjoyed also dipping into Emily Wilson's. It's very different in feel and kind of outlook. But part of the kind of joys of reading translations is that you do get slightly different philosophies from all of them, and you don't have to choose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kyle, what about you?
For probably similar reason to Il-Kweon, my first is my favorite, and for me it was Robert Fagle's translation.
Okay.
I was reading that kind of at the time when that was the Emily Wilson translation.
Yeah.
I've just started listening to Claire Danes' audiobook of Emily Wilson. I think she does a great job. If I can put in a plug for Fagles, the audiobook on Audible is Ian McKellen.
Yes.
That's a joy.
I
Boy,
almost
it's
listened to
good.
that one, but I don't know if I can do the British accent for that long and pick up on everything. You know?
Yeah, it's it took a little adjusting, but it's hard to beat Ian McKellen. So two things. One, like especially Emily Wilson's translation, a lot of the buzz or maybe controversy was, it's a feminist translation. I think if you're doing anything close to a faith, like a literal translation, you just can't. There's no such thing as a feminist or a misogynist or any sort of ideologically inflected translation, because if you're mostly just translating fairly literally what Homer wrote. So I don't, like, some people get pretty hung up on that. For me, the bigger differences are sort of the overall impressions you get from Homer from different translations. Emily Wilson's is very plain spoken, very business-like in a good way. It's not sort of like unnecessarily fancy and epic. Fagles is a little more sort of fancy and epic, I think also in a good way. If people are looking to read the Odyssey, I would say if you still have a physical bookstore somewhere, go and read the first couple pages of a few of them, and whichever one catches your eye is the one for you, and they're all substantially going to tell you the same story. When you get to something like Nolan's movie, that is his adaptation of the Odyssey. Like he is feeling much more licensed to mix and match, cut things, add things. So that gives a really strong sort of authorial vision or directorial vision. Whereas for translations, you are trying to kind of just let Homer shine through, but with like slightly different filters on the camera, maybe.
I'm curious if you guys have any other recommendations for people who might be interested in classics, whether it's modern interpretations or original translations. Like I talked on our last podcast about a book like Circe by Madeline Miller and someone who's like really interpreting them. I'm curious if there's any others that you guys love and would recommend people check out.
I mean, the obvious one would be the Iliad. So if you want to kind of, yes, the prequel. And kind of, I suppose same goes for the Aeneid. Or if you're more into the kind of the adventure tales on the sea type of thing, then maybe the Argonautica, which spends a considerable time at sea and encountering some of the same kind kind of cast of characters. But I remember when I was really little, reading these kind of actual children's books, or called the Roman Mysteries, this whole series.
Looking it up.
Which I was totally obsessed with. And I remember actually the author, I can't, her name escapes me at the moment, but the author actually coming to school
Caroline
to talk to.
Lawrence.
Yes,
these are going to be
Caroline
for
Lawrence.
me.
Yeah. I thought that was a great introduction as a child.
Oh my God, there's 17 books. Yeah. Why did I not read these as a kid? Wow.
Yeah.
These look great.
Yeah. But I hear a lot more about Percy Jackson, to be honest. So, but I have not read Percy Jackson. So
Percy Jackson is fun. Percy Jackson is great.
Yeah.
What about you, Kyle?
If you like the Emily Wilson translation or the Robert Fagles translation of the Odyssey, they both have translations of the Iliad. If you like the Robert Fagles translations, he has translated the Aeneid. If you like Emily Wilson's translations, there is a wonderful translation in a similar style of the Aeneid by a woman named Sarah Rudin, which is my hands down my favorite translation of any ancient poem. It's just so she uses the same iambic pentameter that Emily Wilson does. I think she translated before Emily Wilson. Same thing. It's the same number of lines as Virgil, but where Emily Wilson is kind of like plain and everyday language, Sarah Rudin just has this plain nobility to it. It's just like every line I'm like, I couldn't think of a better way to say it. It's just and the Aeneid is if you like the Odyssey, like it's got a lot of similar kind of story beats to it. If you like the Iliad, it's got a lot of similar story beats. Gives you the Roman side. For the Odyssey itself, I haven't read Circe. I've read
Song of Achilles.
Song of Achilles, yeah. So Circe's on my list, just haven't got there yet. I think the portrayal of Circe in Nolan's Odyssey might be borrowing from Madeline Miller's Circe. I think especially the thing about how she transformed men into pigs because men sort of are pigs. There's a detail in Circe where she's raped by sailors and then decides, so I think that's coming. Yeah, I don't know if that's official, but that was my read.
I definitely think it seems to me to be very based on that character. Yeah. I really hope we get a full adaptation of that at some point.
Yeah. Kyle, since you're the pop culture guy, what about like pop culture, like adaptations or interpretations of these stories? Is there anything that you'd recommend people watch or anything like that?
Oh boy, I think The Return was underrated. It's grim.
I'd like to watch that now, knowing the story.
It's good. But it's very, very serious.
That's what I've heard.
There's a weirdly very few interpretations of or like pop culture versions of the Odyssey.
Yes.
How? I know
we
you
had
mentioned
like 97 Spider-Mans, and that came out. That started like 70 years ago.
Another one next week. I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Athena and Telemachus are now starring in Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's their sequel.
So I don't know why. I mean, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I know you mentioned that before. Like that's pretty hard to beat. It's just like there's
a Simpsons version of it, there's
I mean, I think back in sort of like the 50s, we had sort of the whole sword and sandals epic period, and that was when they felt more confidence about doing these sorts of stories. And to the extent that's done now, it's more things like Gladiator. So I don't know quite what the reluctance to do it is, but so maybe not so much recommendations, and just hope that there are more.
Sorry, go ahead.
Can I do a plug for Margaret Atwood's Penelope ad?
Okay. This is now on my list. I'm very, very excited.
Yeah.
And I thought the depiction of Penelope in the movie was just really extraordinary. I'm curious if you guys had any thoughts on that or Anne Hathaway's performance.
So I'm in two minds. So I thought her performance was really good. I'm not entirely sure about kind of the portrayal of the character, because the poem is very much more guarded about her thoughts and thinking. And so on the one hand, that kind of gives Nolan and us license to kind of imagine and kind of project how she might be reacting to all of the things that are happening around her, and kind of how she is kind of reacting to and taking charge of the situation. On the other hand, I personally feel like I'm missing some of the complexity because we get told what she's feeling. And particularly when she lashes out at Telemachus, I found that fairly jarring.
That's interesting.
Because she is kind of consistently portrayed in the poem as the kind of ideological match of Odysseus, who is deep
Sure.
thinking, constantly thinking and clever. And she is the only one, really, in the entire epic who gets to beat Odysseus at his own game. In the poem, when she kind of tricks him and tests him by kind of making sure he really is her husband. But so because of that kind of portrayal, I found the lashing out really uncharacteristic. And yet it's also totally recognizable as a very human
Sure.
response. So I see it as an interesting take on the interiority. It wasn't my cup of tea, but that's also fine. Yeah.
Well, I think there's been an interesting switch from Homer's Odysseus is very loud and his Penelope is very quiet. And Nolan's does the exact opposite. And I think it is in keeping with modern sort of understandings about what a traumatized man, how he might behave, and what a woman who is sort of justifiably angry at things that have happened to her. And that extend beyond Penelope to, you look at Penelope, you look at Helen, you look at her sister Clytemnestra, you look at Circe.
Yeah.
These are all women who have been abused by men in various ways, and they're all responding in different ways. And Homer has all those characters as well, and he's also really interested in how all of these different women behave and which are good behaviors and which are bad behaviors. We are interested in them in different ways.
Sure.
For Homer, Clytemnestra certainly, and mostly Helen, were villains. They were women who weren't faithful to their husbands, women who gave in to their lust, women who were oversexed, and all these sorts of things. Clytemnestra murders her husband, which you're not supposed to do either, right?
Yeah.
Nolan gives us much more for a modern eye sympathetic portrayals of these women, right? And I think also, like, Il-Kweon, you and I, we've debated about Penelope, like that. I was more okay with it because I think that is how a modern audience is going to understand a woman who is forced to be in power under these very unideal circumstances, how she's gonna behave. I think, right?
Something I found really interesting from a conversation of a podcast we have not released yet, but with someone else, was talking about adapting a 1920s story. And they were specifically referring to it in, we had to make the music controversial to a modern audience because the point is it was controversial in the 20s. We had to make the hemlines and the bust lines controversial to our modern sensibilities to impact you in the same way.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to hear that interpretation, because it's basically saying, like, what was the intention? How would these characters have been interpreted? And we need to try to give you that impact a little bit more here to make you understand it.
So I found the kind of Nolan's kind of portrayal of women fairly interesting because I think scholars kind of think of the portrayal of women in the Odyssey especially as being extremely complex and open to a variety of interpretations. So particularly queer readings have been very fruitful for the Odyssey, with the strong female characters in Calypso and in Circe as kind of living on their own without man kind of ruling over them. as well as with kind of a little bit to an extent with Clytemnestra and with Helen. So yeah, I think depending on the perspective, it is kind of making a choice and kind of running with it. And I think some people found it more on the side of shutting down different interpretations, which, depending on your perspective, wasn't great. Yeah.
Yeah, shutting down interpretations, and I think one challenging thing that people will find if they read the poem is, there are many things that are recognizable to a modern audience or can be adapted to ways so that, like your 1920s book here, it's, equally scandalous to a modern audience or something. There are many things that are very, very foreign because this is, it's like 3,000 years ago in a very different culture. Are we too late in the podcast to talk about serious stuff, or?
No, we can talk about serious stuff.
Rudi, you read the poems. Did you notice at the end when they hanged all of the female slaves?
Yes, I did.
Great. That's
yes, I did.
Not so
Which
good.
is not in the modern movie. I don't think it has been any modern interpretation.
Really, the slaves are really just represented by Mia Goth's character. I mean, that's really
and there's sort of an implication that she's going to get killed, right? Yeah. But no, in the epic, there are 12 of the maids, female slaves, who have been sleeping with the suitors. I think from a modern perspective, we can understand they probably didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. Odysseus, after killing all the suitors, he said, okay, let's get these slaves to help clean up the carnage. And then Telemachus, my son, you go outside and kill them all. And he goes outside and said, well, Dad said I should stab them, but I don't want to give them an honorable death, so I'm going to hang them. And they do that, and it's portrayed as largely justified, that these slaves have betrayed, they have betrayed, they have not been loyal to me as my their master. They have not been loyal. They have not behaved as good women. That was never going to be in the movie but I mean, wouldn't that have been a much more complex portrayal of Odysseus, Telemachus, Helen, or Penelope, right? So we are having to speak for our time a poem that is easy to do sometimes, and there are other things that are just so incredibly foreign that we leave them out. But if readers go read the Penelope ad, for instance, the maids, as she calls them, are central characters in it, and they are a voice that she elevates. That Nolan, I think, for completely justifiable reasons, has just cut out. But
since we're talking about the ending, I know, Kyle, that's something you wanted to at least touch on, because Nolan does change the ending like pretty drastically in some ways. What did you both think of how he chooses to end the story?
I think I remember you having more intelligent thoughts than I did, Il-Kweon.
I'm sure that's not true, but so I found the ending. Yeah, I found the ending interesting because there is actually a ancient scholarly controversy about the ending of the Odyssey and whether the ending we have is the real one. So some Alexandrian scholars claimed that just after Odysseus and Penelope kind of reunite and recognize each other, there are two different kind of notes. One says this was the end of the Odyssey, and one says this was the limit of the Odyssey. And people have been arguing endlessly about what it means to be an end or a limit, and whether this was based on kind of manuscript evidence already in the 3rd century BCE, or whether this is kind of what they kind of deduced because of their expectations of what an ending looked like. And that has continued kind of to this day, with some scholars arguing, oh, actually, the bit after that bit isn't as good, or is stylistically different, or, oh, it feels very rushed, or it's anticlimactic. And scholars are still debating whether the ending that we have is the real ending. So I found it quite... I hope it was a response to that, in kind of giving us yet another ending to the Odyssey. And I find these scholarly kind of debates very freeing in kind of allowing us to come up with our own. And that feels very much part of the spirit of Greek epic and of Greek mythological traditions as well. So, yeah, I thought Nolan did an interesting job there.
I think he's also responding to the later tradition of Odysseus's portrayal. So the idea of like let's sail off into the sunset into the far west. That's picking up on a starting in the Middle Ages, and then more recently, this idea of Odysseus as being this restless wanderer who just can't ever be satisfied. That's not in really the Odyssey at all. He just
Right.
wants to get home. It's
Me
starting.
too. I would have been like,
I know,
let's
right?
hang out. I got a palace.
Yeah.
I haven't seen my wife in a long time.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I don't
I'd
even
never
know my
leave
son.
again. Yeah, you get back, you're like, I'm not going anywhere.
But no, it's so Dante again in the Inferno. That's the first time we have this idea that after he gets home, he's like, actually, I want to keep sailing. And he ends up sailing out into the Atlantic at a time in the Middle Ages when they were just starting to explore the Atlantic. And then the whole ship goes down and he drowns. And then there's this wonderful poem from the 1800s by a guy named Tennyson called Ulysses, which is the Roman name for Odysseus, which is why sometimes
I heard you,
Ulysses.
Kyle, almost say Ulysses earlier.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and at some point I should explain that. Yeah, the Romans called him Ulysses, the Greeks called him Odysseus. You can read that online, or you can find a YouTube video of Helen Mirren reading it to Stephen Colbert on The Late Show. It is a wonderful poem.
Enjoyable.
Yeah, and it's basically like Ulysses in his old age saying, "I'm sick of being home. My wife's getting old. I'm bored of everything. I want to go on one last hurrah, and I'm going to sail off into the sunset." So I think Nolan's picking that up, but Penelope now gets to come along for the voyage. And I think it's less about like wanderlust and more about a veteran can't always come home.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going on, right? I think that there's too much trauma in Odysseus's life and in Penelope's life. We need to go on the road. And Telemachus, it's your problem now, basically.
I think I've really enjoyed from our conversation today is just really an understanding that this movie feels like it's not just Emily Wilson's translation on the screen in Nolan land. It's really in conversation with all these versions of him in literature throughout time, and that there's really a lot of grounding if you don't just look at it as, oh, this is, this one Odyssey translation, blah, blah, blah. There's really a lot of
there's something cumulative about
there's
this.
a lot of textual evidence, which is really so interesting.
Yeah, this podcast today it was books first, I guess.
Yeah,
there you go.
It was many books first.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end on, and I really appreciate you both. We both do.
Thank you so much.
Coming on and educating us on all of this and having this conversation. This was great. Before we go, is there anything that either of you want to plug?
Oh,
I know, Kyle, you have a book coming out.
Yes, my publishers would probably like that. There will be in the next couple of years a translation of Ovid's Amores and Heroides for the University of California Press's World Literature and Translation Series.
Cool,
wonderful,
cool. You have a defining book coming out.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you to say. But so I have a book coming out probably next year on Alcaeus of Lesbos, who's a contemporary of Sappho. So on the kind of poetry and performance of Alcaeus of Lesbos.
Cool.
Coming out with Oxford University Press.
Oh my God, I know someone who will really love that book. I'm going to go find it.
And if people want to hear more from you, go enroll in Western University and take your classes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. This was great, and we will see you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for having us.
It Was a Book First is hosted and produced by Sophie Vershbow and Rudi Greenberg. Music written by Cliff Blum and John Connolly, produced by Kevin Potts. Logo by Trisha Louise Prieto. Website by Kevin Bob. Follow us on Instagram at It Was a Book First Pod, and we'll see you next week.